Are we there yet? Hi, I'm Dan Cortopassi. Welcome to Painting and Weathering. In this episode, I'm going to finish up the rust bucket boxcar. Last time I talked about different ways to apply rust to the car. This time I'm going to do some patching, apply the reporting marks, and finish it up. So let's get started. So as I mentioned in the first episode, I worked on fading the paint, and then the last episode I put some rust on the model. And in this episode I want to do some patching, and the car that I'm looking at has basically overpainted sections between the ribs where the lettering is. You can just barely make out that it says Peninsula Terminal here now. And then also it has patches over the reporting marks. So I want to do all of that, and they're different colors. The patches up here are a light blue, almost the same color as the car, but not quite. The patch down here is a darker blue, and then there's some black on top of that. So it's actually three different patches that I want to put on here. So I'm going to start with the upper part. So for the first patch, I'm going to use this Vallejo light sea blue color, which is actually kind of close to the color that the car was before I started weathering it and fading it. I think this should work out pretty well. I might add just a little bit of white to it to lighten it up just a little, but I think it's pretty good the way it is. So I'll need to do some masking for this. Basically the patches are between the ribs, so I don't want to actually paint the ribs. And then they only go down maybe so far, and they're not all the same. There's like, it was obvious that they did it in a hurry, and the bottoms and tops don't match necessarily exactly. So I want to make sure I try to reproduce that. So this is a plate glass cutting surface that I got at a craft store. I don't remember which one. It might have been like Michael's or something. I've had it for a while now. And what I've done is put some blue tape on it, and then I have a straight edge and a very sharp hobby knife. And I'm just going to cut some strips. And I'll take these strips and I'm going to apply them to the ribs. These might be a little too wide. I might need to redo this. Yeah, I think those are going to be a little bit wide, so I'm going to come back and do some other ones that are a little thinner. Okay, so I've redone this, and it occurred to me as I was doing it that I didn't need to go all the way to the bottom because the patch is only going to be up here. The other thing I wanted to mention about this is that I didn't press the edges of this down because I'm trying to get a soft edge on the paint. So it's pressed down on the rib itself, but these pieces of tape are just floating over the actual body of the car. All right, so I've used some bigger pieces of tape to kind of mask off the rest of the side. And I've kind of made the bottom here jagged using small squares of tape that I just kind of tacked on randomly, so that when it's done, it'll look like it's a little bit uneven, because that's how the real one looks. So the thing I want to just mention again is that the top and bottom pieces are also not pressed against the panels between the ribs. They're just kind of floating over it. So the idea is to airbrush straight this way. Okay, I don't know if I'll be able to show that on camera, probably not, but to just shoot the paint directly perpendicular to the side of the car. And hopefully that'll make a nice feathered edge around the edge of these patch spots. All right, so I airbrushed the car off camera, but I did it exactly as I said, just directly perpendicular to the side. So let's see what we've got. So far looks good. Yeah, this is looking pretty much like I wanted it to. If I can get the tape off. Yeah, I like it. I am really, really happy with this. It's exactly what I wanted. Kind of a soft edge around the darker blue patches. I just think it looks really neat. I'm really happy with the way this is turning out so far. The only thing I'll need to do is this, the Vallejo paint has just a little bit of a sheen to it, so I'll have to maybe do another clear coat of some clear flat over the whole thing. But I think I'll wait on that until I'm done patching the reporting mark area. So I've let this dry overnight, and the sheen that I was talking about has actually gone away, so I think the paint was just not completely dry. I think, you know, it's cold as I'm doing this, it's wintertime, and the paint is taking longer to dry than I'm used to because of that. Winter's not my favorite time to paint models, but you know, if I waited for ideal conditions, I would never paint anything. So sometimes you just got to go for it. Anyway, it's looking pretty good, and now we can move on to the next step. So in case you're curious, for the patching that I already did, like I mentioned, I used this Vallejo Light Sea Blue, and then I lightened it with just a few drops of this light blue, which is actually not too far from what's on the model after all the weathering. So it just toned it a little bit and made it a little closer to what is on the car, which is kind of the effect I was after, just so it's kind of subtle. So for the reporting mark patches, I'm going to use the same light sea blue again, but I'm going to darken it with some of this steel blue, which is, as you can see, a pretty dark blue. And that'll kind of keep the blue in the same color range, but it'll just be darker. At least that's what I'm hoping will happen. Not super dark like this, just like a few drops of this mixed in with some of that. And I think that should be the color I'm after. So I'm using the same technique to mask the reporting mark area that I used for the upper part. The one thing I wanted to mention is I put a little piece of paper in this area here where the ACI label is, which is a decal. And that's just to prevent any possibility of the tape sticking to the decal and lifting it off. I don't want that to happen. So this little piece of paper should help to prevent that. So this is the finished masking, and I've just left 3 openings so that when I spray the paint, it'll cover the reporting marks. And that's the only part of the car that I'm touching with this particular color. All right, let's see how this turned out. I really like the way this is turning out so far. This is pretty much exactly what I wanted. Again, the nice soft edges around the patches. So it looks like they didn't do too careful a job with masking, and that's kind of exactly what I want. So for the last one, I've done the same thing again, except I've reduced the area. And what it is the reporting mark will go up here, and then the number will go across these 2 panels here. And that's pretty much like the car that I'm looking at in the photos. So I didn't want to forget about the end reporting marks, and for this I just masked more conventionally with the tape pressed against the actual surface of the model for a little bit of a sharper edge here. But that'll, you know, give me a spot to redo these as well. All right, so the final patching is now done. I'm really happy with the way this looks. Now this one I actually made shiny on purpose because it's going to have decals on it. So after I sprayed the black, I sprayed some microgloss on it. And now I'm just going to have to let this dry overnight. And I think the ends worked out pretty well too. This is a lot smaller, of course, so I don't think the edges matter quite so much, but it'll be good to have a reporting mark up there. And this is also gloss coated. If you're curious, for this patch I used Vallejo NATO Black, which is kind of an off black. If any of you are old enough to remember Pactra Hot Rod Primer, it's kind of like that. It's like almost flat black, but not quite. Okay, so while the boxcar body is drying, I'm going to do a little more work on the roof. This is Pan Pastels, which I used earlier in the first episode on the car body, but not this color. This is called Raw Umber Tint, which looks nothing like raw umber to me, but that's what they call it. So I'm going to just use this to see if I can lighten the roof just a little, because in the photos it's very faded, especially between the rust patches. I'm just kind of patting some of this on. I'm also working a little bit into the rusty areas in a couple of spots. Mostly I'm using it in the in-between spaces. So now that I put some on, I'm using my little stiff brush to kind of blend it a little bit. Just kind of patting it. It's producing kind of a mottled effect, which I like. Not super even. Now I'm going to use a soft brush to just blend it a little bit and get rid of any excess. Alright, I set the roof on the car just temporarily to see how it's looking, and I like it better with it lightened. I think it goes better with the lighter color of the car, and it's looking pretty good. So I think I will call the roof done for now. I left the clear coat to dry overnight, and now I can apply the decals. I'm going to use this sheet from Microscale, which is stencil style lettering. So these sheets typically have the letters in several sizes. So I'm going to use one of these kind of medium sizes here for the reporting marks on the side of the car, and then the really tiny ones for the ends. Alright, so I've cut the railroad initials, which is NCC for my North Coast Railroad. So since these are small, I wet the decals right on the model, and now I'm going to use some microset to wet the area where they're going to go. So as I stated in the first episode, when I put the ACI labels on, microset goes on under the decal, and it's a wetting agent to help you position it. So there's the initials, and I'm trying not to fuss with this as much as I usually do, because the lettering on the prototype cars that I'm looking at isn't always perfect or straight. So even though it's really hard for me to not want to straighten them all out perfectly, I'm trying to resist the urge. So you could use scissors, but I like my cutting mat and the hobby knife to cut out the numbers and letters from the decal sheet. Alright, so now I've got the letters and numbers on, and they're where I want them, so I can apply some microsol. Microsol goes on top of the decal, and it's a softening agent, so you don't want to try to move them again once you've done this. So I just put a tiny bit on it first, and then later if I need to, I can go back and put some more. This will help them get down into the paint, and it'll make the backing disappear. So by the way, if you're wondering what this red spot here is, I patched it one more time off camera because there was a new date here, and I thought that if this car has been patched out and re-stenciled, then there would probably be a different date here. So I'm going to do that with these decals as well. And I used red because I just thought it made for a nice contrast. Sometimes, you know, on an overall blue car, you know, regardless of what the overall color is, just having one little spot of something contrasting looks really neat. At least I think it does. It's okay to repeatedly apply microsol until all of the silvering and bubbles go away, if there are any. This isn't looking too bad so far. So if there are any bubbles, what I like to do is just poke them very gently with a very sharp hobby knife. And then I apply more microsol. Holding the model up to the light from a variety of angles is a good way to spot any bubbles or silvering. I think this is looking pretty good. I did have to apply microsol and poke the decal several times. So the last thing I want to do is just use some plain water and remove any excess decal fluid that might have congealed on the model. I have to be a little careful because this could affect some of the weathering that I did. It looks like it's not doing too much though, which is good. So if you don't do this, the decal fluid residue can leave like full-size water droplet effects that I don't really like. I took the car out and coated it with a combination of Tester's Dull Coat and Tamiya Clear Flat. The reason I use the Dull Coat is it seems to hide the decal film a little better than the Tamiya for some reason. But anyway, now it's nice and dull and you can't see the shiny spots anymore. It's looking pretty good. So there were no dashes on the decal sheet, so to make the little dash in the date, I basically took a 1 and cut it in half and then turned it on its side. So also about this, the date 591 kind of helps to establish the era that the car's in, which, corresponds with my 1990s modeling era. And the SR is for Santa Rosa, which in my fictitious North Coast world is a location where they have a shop. So I ended up using an N-scale sheet for these end letters because I couldn't find any letters that were small enough to fit within this black area on the HO scale sheet. They were all a little too big. So anyway, I think it's not quite the same style of stencil as the sides, but I think it works. So at this point, it's time to start putting the car together. And I think I can attach the roof now. So I'm going to use some canopy glue. I don't know that the roof really even needs to be glued, but this will just help to keep it from popping off, but should still allow it to be removable if I need to at some point. So the roof does actually want to pop up just a little bit on one side, so maybe the glue is a good idea. I've used a couple pieces of tape to hold the roof down on the ends on this side where it tends to want to come up. I have been careful to keep the tape off of the decals because even if decals are clear coated, sometimes tape can lift them, so I'm always careful with that. So I haven't really done much with the underside of the car, so I'm just going to take a little of this black colored weathering powder and just brush a little on. I'm not super concerned with the underneath because frankly, you really don't see it. So I don't know. I know there's different schools of thought on that, but kind of my philosophy is if, I'd rather put the time into something else versus spending a lot of time on something that isn't really that visible. So this is just kind of to tone it down. And when I turn the car over, some of this is going to fall out, but that's okay. I just want it to look good while the car's on the rails. So this is another kind of an old brush that is fairly stiff. And I find those brushes are really good for powders. Trying to keep this from getting on the sides of the car too, because after spending all the time to make those look the way they do, I don't want to mess it up. I'm also trying to be careful not to wreck any of these details because some of them are fairly delicate. So I turned the car over and like I said, a lot of the powder did fall out. Some of it didn't, and I was contemplating what to do with it, but I think I'm just going to take the smaller brush and just smear it around a little bit. Once it's kind of been scrubbed, it tends to stick. So mostly I'm just hoping that, this will keep it from, raining black stuff all over the layout when I eventually get the layout. Not a problem yet, but, hopefully soon. I'll touch up some details using some Vallejo NATO black on the brake hoses. I'm going to put some black on the KD trip pins too. I know a lot of people cut these off these days, but I keep mine, at least for the time being. And I'm going to get the tips of the brake hoses with some Vallejo gunmetal. Could also use silver, but I don't have any handy, so I'm using this. It's close enough, I think, to look fine. The side frames in the trucks are still a little bit shiny, so I'm going to take them outside and sandblast them. I removed the wheels, but I still have them labeled A and B because, as I mentioned in the first episode, I've already adjusted the coupler height and I've had to file the bolsters so the trucks are not quite the same anymore. So after sandblasting, the truck is kind of a dark gray color. I could probably just leave it like this, but I think I'm going to go ahead and paint it. Having sandblasted it will make a good surface for the paint to stick to. So I sprayed the trucks with a mixture of NATO black and some dark earth to kind of do the painting and weathering all in one step. I think they look pretty good. So I painted the wheels in the first episode. Now I'm going to go and use a little bit of the dark brown weathering powder to layer on another bit of weathering. So that wasn't really having the desired effect, so I decided to switch and try some black. I think this is looking better. The wheels were already dark brown, so I think maybe that's why. I like having multiple colors on the wheels because if you look at real train wheels, they're not really one single color. If you get up close to them, there's a lot of different shades of dirt and grime and all kinds of other stuff. So I think layering things makes it more realistic. So I got some paint on the wheels in the first episode, and I'm going to use my Dremel with a wire brush attachment to take it off. So I'm going to hold the tool at a slight angle to the wheels so that the brushes are spinning away from the wheel face. That way I won't take any paint off the wheel face, just the treads. Now the trucks are basically done and I can reinstall them. So just like I do in the Rip Track segment of product reviews, one truck should be set up so that it can pivot back and forth but won't rock side to side. And the other one should both pivot and rock, and that way the car can go over uneven track, but it won't wobble. All right, the car's on its own wheels again for the first time in a while. And I already checked the coupler height, I checked the wheel gauge. It's not wobbling. Everything looks pretty good, so now it's just a couple more finishing touches and it'll be finished. So I had a little debate with myself about how to best do the grab irons, and I decided that painting them on the car was probably the most practical thing to do. So I just need to glue them in to the holes. I'm using some canopy glue to do that. So if there's any excess glue that squeezes out, a little micro brush dipped in water will get rid of it pretty quickly. It's one of the nice things about canopy glue. It's a little more forgiving than like CA, which would make shiny spots that would then require another clear coat to get rid of. I did sandblast these grab irons, or ladder rungs if you will, to clean them and also to improve paint adhesion. I found that sometimes, I think they're actually steel, sometimes the paint will flake off, so I'm hoping that the slight roughness of the surface you get from sandblasting will help with that. So to paint the grab irons, I'm going to use the same two colors of blue that I've been using for the patches. This is the lighter blue. I'm going to start with that this time. Mix in a little of this. Yeah, it looks pretty close to what's on there. I'll just get them with a small brush. Yeah, that looks like, well, I can't see a difference, so I'd say that's pretty close. I'm not using obviously any kind of formula here. I'm just going by eye and blending I blended the colors until they looked, pretty close to what's there. And, I think it's important to rely more on your eye and what looks good than formulas. And take some of the dark brown weathering powder and just go over the couplers a little bit. The powders will dirty them up nicely without interfering with their operation, which I like. You don't want to do anything to couplers that might make them stick or not work right. Maybe I'll also hit the crossover platform just a little bit. So to finish it off, I sprayed the car with some Tamiya Clear Flat with my airbrush. And I like this a lot because it dried dead flat with no sheen at all, which is what I wanted. So I think I'm going to call it done. I really like the way it looks. With anything artistic, there's always a question of, when is it finished? And there's that old saying that art is never really finished, it's only abandoned. But for me, anyway, there comes a point where you're not really improving things, you're just changing it. And I think we're at that point with this one now, so I'm going to leave it alone. I think it looks pretty good, and I'm pretty happy with it. Whether or not you think it's a rust bucket, I guess, depends on your definition of rust bucket. To me, it looks pretty rusty and beat out, which is what I wanted, and I'm pretty happy. So before I go, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the show and about this particular project. One of the things that I've been trying to do is to level up my own weathering. And to do that, I've been trying to work more from photos and rely less on formulas. I've talked about trying to avoid formulaic weathering before, but I think it's kind of a good thing. This is the first freight car model that I've weathered in a long time where I didn't take the airbrush and airbrush a coat of dust or dirt color on the lower surfaces to finish it off. Because honestly, I didn't think it needed it. With all the paint fading and other things that I'd done, it looked pretty good the way it was. So I just decided to leave it alone in that regard. And I think it's important, to not always do everything the same exact way, because if you do, you end up with a fleet of cars that look like they've all been to all the same places at the same time, which isn't typically what you see, out on the road when you're looking at freight cars. So, I think it's cool. And I think this car now kind of tells a story. It's a car that was in the National Railway Utilization Company scheme, and then it got purchased eventually by my fictitious North Coast, patched, re-stenciled in a couple of spots. So it's got like a story to it now, which I think is kind of neat. So I enjoy that, and I'll enjoy seeing this running around on my Donner layout eventually. Another thing I'd like to mention is that all of the techniques that I've used could be applied in any order. You could use different colors, depending on the color of the model that you're working on. They can be cherry-picked to achieve specific effects. So you don't necessarily have to follow along and try to reproduce what I'm doing exactly. You could easily just use any of these techniques in isolation, and I think they'd work just fine. So anyway, I just wanted to, bring up those points. And, personally, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out, and hopefully we'll do some more of these. So let me know what you think. So that's about it for this project. I'd really like to know what you think of this new show, so if you like this video, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned, and thanks for watching.